The Dean of Pittsburgh Sports Writers.
Williams has his 17th game with double-figure
scoring. This is Marky Billson. How do you do?
Points. Up next for the Volunteers. They're going to step
I'm fine. I'm fine here. I'm back in.
Two things in my ear.
What? I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I self-produced the show, and that's the sports update going on here. So yeah, that's the problem with that. I turned it down here. And come on here in about 15 seconds or so. I mean, the pre-thing. So, anyway, how are things going on for you in retirement?
Everything is good.
Okay. Does your brother still officiate basketball games?
No, he's retired. He's been done with that for 10 or 15 years, I think.
Okay. No, I remember when I went, I went, of all places, to both Point Park and East Tennessee State. Now, there's a different mix right there. But, yeah, I remember him calling Point Park games in when I was younger and all that. So, anyway, you ready to go? Talk about the Hall of Fame? All right, I hope so. My next guest, former Tennessee football coach, and for my money, greatest living Vol in history, Johnny Majors, once told me, in so many words, was his favorite sports writer. Really spoke highly of Bob Smizik. So does the Baseball Writers Association, because Smizik, who I know a little bit from writing for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where he was a lead sports columnist, has been voting on the Baseball Hall of Fame for quite some time. So with the announcement coming up at 6, I decided to call up Bob Smizik here and invite him here. Welcome to Tri-Cities Sports Now in the Tri-Cities, Tennessee area, Bob. I want to go and ask you here a little bit. You've been voting now for the Baseball Hall of Fame. How long? Because I know you covered Major League Baseball as a beat reporter in the 70s, but how long have you been voting on the Hall of Fame?
I would say probably since the late 70s. So that would be almost 40 years, I guess.
All right. And one of the things that I used to joke with Bob Smizik about, he was the official scorer of the 1974 National League Championship Series games 1 and 2. And I remember you saying, you and I are probably the only two people who know that. But I remember getting the note from the Dope book back in the day about that. And I look at your ballot that you submitted on email. And the 6 players that you voted for were Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Chipper Jones, Edgar Martinez, Manny Ramirez, and Jim Thome. Now, Bob, I wanted to ask you here, I guess when I look at that, the first thing that stands out to me is that Vladimir Guerrero, who the early returns certainly have a strong case of him making the Hall of Fame for, is not on your ballot. Why did you not vote for Vladimir Guerrero?
Well, that's a tough call. And it's a good question. And, I can't give you a definitive answer. He doesn't ring the bell for me. Very good numbers, outstanding player. I believe the Hall of Fame is for the very best players, and I don't think he measures up to that level. He's probably going to get in. It won't be the first time that I didn't vote for somebody who got in. I just it didn't work for me.
Now, one guy that maybe you might say, okay, if it's going to be truly elite, that you did vote for before we get to Bonds, Clemens, and Ramirez, who would be the controversial picks, but Edgar Martinez, Bob, because here's a guy who's primarily a DH. Now, one could make the argument that even though the rule has been around since 1973 and even in exhibition games before then, hey, here's a guy, didn't play on the field, he's not a complete player. So why Edgar Martinez if you have discriminating tastes for the Hall of Fame?
Well, the fact that someone is a designated hitter doesn't make him any less worthy of being in the Hall of Fame than if he were a third baseman or a shortstop. Just like a relief pitcher can get in football, offensive guards get in, and what do they do compared to quarterbacks? Then I have no problem. I'm not prejudiced against DH. He was an excellent hitter. I will admit that I did not originally vote for him when he came on the ballot because I wasn't up to speed on his accomplishments playing in the American League West so much of the time. I just wasn't fully aware of what he had done, and that's my bad. That I changed my vote on the statistics will bear me out. I know his OPS plus is well ahead of Guerrero's, and that's a lot of guys prefer WAR is their final measuring stick. I'm an OPS plus guy.
And OPS, of course, being on base plus slugging. It's pretty much the standard stat now, but occasionally you'll find somebody who's OPS. What is that? Topps is even putting it on the back of baseball cards these days, though. And, I find that interesting. Now, do you feel kind of like I do that WAR wins above replacement? Look, it is a theoretical stat. Is that one of the things that you hold against WAR?
I don't, I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I still don't fully understand what WAR is. And it is being used by people who I greatly respect, so I'm sure there's a lot to it. But I'll ask you this question. Part of WAR is defense, is that correct?
I believe it is.
It is. Well, who was charting every defensive play Vladimir Guerrero or Edgar Martinez made in the early years of their career? I don't believe anyone was. So I don't see how defensive WAR for anyone who played at all in the last century or the first part of this century can be valid, because no one was watching every play of every game for those players. So I choose not to go along with WAR, and it really bothers me that it's becoming such a reliant statistic. It's like it is the end of the end. His WAR is 3.5, his WAR is 3.4, therefore 3.5 is better. I just don't buy that. I think baseball is a much more complex game than that.
And the other thing it is theoretical, and there are 3 different ways to compute it. Don't ask me how. I'll have to go back to my algebra teacher to help me out with it. But I've seen there are 3 actual different formulas. It's not just hit divided by at-bats, Baseball Hall of Fame voter Bob Smizik. But the one thing on your ballot that I did see was Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Manny Ramirez. 3 players, all associated with PEDs. Why vote for those 3 players?
Several reasons. The first reason is this. If they don't want them in the Hall of Fame, take them off the ballot, as they did with Pete Rose. If they're on the ballot, I think they have every right to get my consideration.
That's a good point.
2, I'm not going to be the police force for the Hall of Fame. I fully believe that all 3 of those players used performance-enhancing drugs, which when they were using them, by the way, was not against the rules. But who's to say that other players who were already in the Hall of Fame also were using them? I'll give you a great example. Craig Biggio. What if I told you that the 3 consecutive best home run years, of his career were when he was 38, 39, and 40? What if I told you the 2 best career home runs of his career, 38 and 39? What would you think about that?
I would wonder if he was on PEDs.
Okay, right. What about Mike Piazza? Why do you believe you have used PEDs? And I voted for him. In the Hall of Fame, but he's in there too. So I'm not going to penalize Bonds, Ramirez, and Clemens because their PED issues were maybe more publicized than were Biggio and Piazza.
Do you have any belief that, let's say, when Barry Bonds was a 2-time MVP for the Pittsburgh Pirates, those 7 years, and it's much slender man, doesn't have the build, I think we can safely say maybe he wasn't using PEDs during that era, or at least that's what the story goes by. Would you be inclined to say, well, at this point, he was a Hall of Famer, so that's another reason why I'm going to vote for him. The whole body of work, the pre-PED, I think that's a Hall of Famer.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why, for example, I don't vote for Sammy Sosa. The other thing about Bonds, his numbers were so spectacular. I mean, he had numbers that only Ted Williams and Babe Ruth rival. He wasn't just another guy. He was phenomenal. And, I don't know what PEDs do for you, but they may enable you to hit the ball further. They don't enable you to hit the ball more often. They don't enable you to have the finest batting eye, perhaps, in the history of the game. So it wasn't just that he was a Hall of Famer before he went to PEDs. It was that he was so absolutely sensational after that also.
There are are many things I can remember about Bonds, but I remember fifth game, 2002 National League Championship Series, Giants-Cardinals tie game, bottom of the eighth, 2 out, nobody on. La Russa decides to walk Bonds. I mean, this is everything I've ever learned against baseball strategy. You know, it's easier to score from first base than home plate. And, in fact, the next hitter, Benito Santiago, hits a home run, and the Giants go on to win the series that way. But I just kept thinking perhaps a bad strategic move, but certainly tremendous respect for Barry Bonds here.
I'll give you a better one. And I'm pretty sure the opposing manager was Jim Tracy when he was with the Dodgers. And this is hard to believe, but it's true. He walked Bonds with the bases loaded.
I did that. The only other guy I know who ever called for that was Mel Ott in 1944, Bob Smizik. Well, I'm against a hard break here in 30 seconds, so I'm going to ask you here, do you have any time here to come on? Because there's a couple of questions I want to ask about the now public voting of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Can you stay on through a 3-minute break?
Sure, I'll be happy to.
Okay, Bob Smizik, Hall of Fame voter. They're going to announce it at 6 p.m., and this is a guy we really respected at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Tri-City Sports Now coming back after this. Just so you know something.